Eggman tells him, "Have fun, you two." For once he does remind me of the game Eggman. He keeps it simple and short. I read that hearing his Mike Pollock voice. It doesn't need to say his voice echoed from the hole that was just blown through the house. Why would he echo? He must be using a gadget. Saying in a moment is always redundant. Knuckles lands on top of Sonic and asks where it is, expecting him to know what he means. When Sonic asks what he means, after a pointless recap narration that Eggman always wanted Sonic's power, Knuckles just repeats himself loudly. Clearly, if he didn't get his answer the first time he attacked him, it's not gonna work again. What a miserable way to characterize the character so far. Literally just an idiot. Why is only Boom Knuckles too far for some? If he thinks Sonic has something he wants, why doesn't he just search his house for it and plan to only attack him if he tries to stop him? It couldn't be that Eggman would disapprove, because he would just ignore him and punch him if he tried to stop him. He punches the ground, and the shockwave sends Sonic flying off the shattering patio. He looks up with hazy vision and sees his enemies standing in front of him. It's lampshaded that Eggman talks too much, and I have to assume it was Sonic who said that. After the story repeats itself, Knuckles points out that movie Sonic is untrained and unskilled. Sonic says a cliche hero response and spins it to a sparking spin dash, but Knuckles stops it without getting cut by his spine somehow. Even the other M comic by Ian Flynn had Eggman catch his spin dash and then get hurt by it. Knuckles swirls the series' protagonist like a basketball. At least that was new, but somehow it gives Sonic motion sickness, and yet his spin dash didn't do that. The same spin dash that kills any Badnik on contact didn't hurt Knuckles when he grabbed it. How desperate were people to see Knuckles fighting? Of course Knuckles would do well in a fight. That's like liking the story because he's breathing. How is it fan service that the writers thought they couldn't make Knuckles cool for real? They had to force Sonic's abilities to be ignored so he's fighting a fake Sonic. They could have had Knuckles do all of these fighting moves to a robot. The game Sonic and Knuckles and Sonic Triple Trouble didn't have a fight between these two that wasn't pulling this bullshit. Did the people who like this hate Sonic? Were they delusional the whole time they said they liked Sonic in the movies? If you like a character, you're gonna call bullshit when they get the warp effect for unfair treatment to prop up another character. There's a difference between liking a character and pointing out that he's different from the source material. After redundant narration, Knuckles body slams Sonic to the ground and picks him up by the neck. Two more things he never did before. But the latter's too mean with how it portrays Knuckles. Why didn't Sonic just dodge that? Sonic struggles, and the narration wastes my time. Knuckles finally feels self-conscious enough to explain himself. He says arrogantly that his destiny is to restore the ultimate power to the home of his people. After padding, somehow Eggman is startled at the words ultimate power, even though he would just assume he meant Sonic's power. That's the only power he thinks can possibly exist. Sonic's smart enough to see this as an opening he can use to distract them. He once again says predictable stuff in his defense as he reaches for rubble. He sees his satchel that was blown outside by the shockwave. Sonic's predictably accused of playing dumb and he's shaken. Surprisingly, he's called Child of Mobius, which every Sonic fan liked, and eventually he says Longclaw took out the echidnas who were after him. I wonder why they're portraying Knuckles in this edgy way instead of having punch him on the ground a lot, keeping it simple and in character. If this happened in Shadow the Hedgehog, the fans would have been mad, but suddenly it's not too dark when the movies do it. Sonic's vision goes black and he hears a police car siren. The narration wastes time stating the obvious, and the squad car crashes through the fence and into Knuckles as he was smirking uncharacteristically. I'm glad Tails was useful immediately and made his first impression to Sonic by being surprisingly smart. When I'd never expect one of the heroes to have the guts to drive a car into him, because that might kill him. Too bad this wasn't the first time the audience saw movie Tails. Sonic gets to his feet and hears a young voice saying he needs to recalibrate the brakes and wonders if Knuckles is okay. Logically, he'd be out for the rest of the movie unless there was a time skip. And it's a good thing he's actually compassionate about Knuckles. Logically, he shouldn't be, but that's better than Sonic. After redundant narration, it eventually says Tails reached from the driver's seat telling him to get in to save himself. And Sonic grabs his satchel and obeys. There's redundant padding that recaps the previous scene. As Tails drives, it's satisfying to see him gush over Sonic saying it's an honor to finally meet him. When I pretend he's talking to the game Sonic who deserved this. Because that's Tails. It's also in character of him to second guess himself and ask if it's okay to call him by his first name already. Already it's top tier instead of ignoring all of his traits. It says he's driving at 100 miles an hour, and somehow I think Sonic would wonder why everyone called him Tails. Sonic of course guesses right, and Tails lampshades that he should have known he'd get it. How's he that stupid? Sonic acknowledges that his tails are cool, and then he freaks out about what just happened to him for a few sentences of recap, where he calls Knuckles Clifford. What's the appeal of having Sonic make pop culture references? You could use another character for that. If it's trying to make him relatable, that ship sailed with his bratty behavior up to this point. I wish the film started with him meeting Knuckles. Tails tells him that Knuckles is the most dangerous warrior in the galaxy who thinks he's the key to finding the Master Emerald. Sonic had been told stories about that thing by Longclaw, and he thinks it's as fictional as them. Tails wastes time and says it's been hidden and its location is the most closely guarded secret ever, and he's one of the few still looking for it. After pointless narration, Sonic thinks about leaving on his own because the hero doesn't need to keep involving anyone else in his danger. Well, at least he learned his lesson from the last movie. Tails says that he's picking up an energy signal with a handheld device that's making noise. So he's able to warn him that Knuckles is pursuing them despite being hit by a car. What amateur writing. The writers wrote themselves into a corner by having Sonic need saving. They should have just had Sonic run away, which he'd react fast enough to do instead of forgetting his bullet time power. Sonic could have just rolled on his chest and then spin dashed away from Knuckles and then run away. Tails could have flown into Knuckles while punching him, but it feels more unique to have Tails driving a police car. A blinking traffic light ahead of them turns red, and Sonic shouts the obvious and pulls the wheel hard to avoid the oncoming traffic, so that's why I cared about law-abiding all of a sudden. In the rear view, Sonic sees Knuckles running for a split second with his fist digging chunks out of the pavement for no reason. That's not how he runs, and how can he keep running and be punching the pavement? I'm guessing Knuckles will never answer to and make up for costing someone money having to fix this. Why do the writers of these movies keep making the heroes of the Sonic series criminals for no reason? After padding, Knuckles smashes through a water truck behind them, causing even more damage. There's redundant narration and townsfolk screaming. Finally, Sonic lampshades that him being in a car is ridiculous because it could run faster. The only reason it was justified that he didn't do it earlier was he was distracted by what Tails was saying and by himself trying to talk. Tails reassures him and grabs his wrist bizarrely excitedly. He hopes he won't abandon him and repeatedly asks him to promise him that. That's creepy. Why is he like this? When isn't explained that he was bullied worse than Tails in the games was? Although it would make sense if you thought about it, because he'd be so traumatized by the bullying. Sonic humors him and Tails ducks under the console of the car. After padding, Tails cranks a gizmo he'd plugged into the motor from the inside of the car. He's not getting out of it and lifting up a trunk to look at the engine. It's a world with Eggman's technology in it, so I can believe that cop cars are just different. And already the car speeds up a lot to get them away from Knuckles. It's always great when they use the technology skills for something visual and flashy looking as well as useful, and use it a lot. It's so sad that he's not used like this as a character all the time. I don't want him to just stick to staring at a handheld computer and hacking. I don't want him to just stick to talking. How is that visually interesting and actioning? Most of his dialogue is still exposition, but it's his first scene. Sonic slides over to take the wheel. He steers the car up the winding paths that lead into the mountains and out of town. He states the obvious and asks Tails to explain how he knows so much about him. But Tails never revealed that he knew anything about him but his name. I guess this line of dialogue is based on dialogue from the movie, and the book cut out the dialogue so he wouldn't look like a stalker. I never saw the film, but I remember the reviews from when it came out. Tails wastes my time and is practically hopping up and down on the seat adorably as he says everyone knows about Sonic and he spent his whole life learning about him. He doesn't explain why, unfortunately. He doesn't explain why he has a positive outlook on him, which is confusing because the last book explains that everyone feared Sonic would unleash chaos because of his speed. How would anyone know that he did something heroic with his speed in the last film? Which is the only reason people would start idolizing him in general. Tails being a fan of him is only charming in the meta sense. In this universe, he only admires him because of how much power he has. Wouldn't a bullied, lonely kid just assume he would abuse it against him, like how everyone else abused him? Just him being weird like him doesn't mean he's a good guy. He just came to him assuming that he'd be a good friend to him out of desperation because he's a kid. He gives him exposition we already know, and Sonic asks him why everyone thinks he's the key to finding the Master Emerald. He's told Longclaw was the keeper of the Emerald's secret location. He reveals that for centuries the Owls wanted to control it, but eventually saw it as unstable. Sadly, it's not explained why in a pre-technology world they would ever think that. So that interesting lore is just skipped over. So to make the plot happen, they hid the Emerald. Could have just explained that they didn't want anyone to abuse the Emerald, but no, it was unstable. After padding, he says Sonic was expected by the Owls to be able to harness the Emerald's energy like no one else. After padding, it says impossibly, Knuckles' fist dug deep into the passenger door and in one smooth motion the Echidna shredded the door entirely. Impossibly is stupid to say about someone who's supposed to have super strength. The Echidna takes longer to read than he, and entirely is redundant. It keeps being redundant, and he reaches for Sonic who tries to cope with it with a snark like Sonic would. I'd like a lot more of that from him instead. He pulls the wheel wildly across the road, shaking Knuckles loose for just a moment. Their pursuer takes longer to say than Knuckles, and just is redundant. Tails turns to Sonic, and there's redundant narration, and he wastes precious time saying he's got an idea and asking Sonic if he trusts him. Shockingly, Sonic says no. I had to remember his backstory to make sense of that one, after he saved his life. After padding, Tails yanks hard on the wheel the other way, shooting the car off the road and towards a thick metal guardrail on the edge of a cliff. Then off the road and is redundant. And of course a guardrail would be thick and metal. It hit it with incredible force, of course it did. And the sound of twisting metal and shattering glass was only barely tamped down by Sonic's screams as the damaged car launched off the cliff. I never saw the word tamped before. Why is this in a kid's book? Knuckles let go. It wastes my time redundantly until Sonic realizes Tails had grabbed Sonic and started flying with him to get him out of the car. Sonic's comment on this has a cheat to get people to laugh by having a funny word in it. And Tails thinks what he said was humorous. He says a blatant falsehood that only Sonic could have come up with something like that. And this and him saying his full name is so he could praise him some more. Since Sonic clearly wasn't trying to make a joke like Tails acted like, I have to assume his past was more traumatic than the Tails we know, and so he's more desperate to get him to like him. Although for all we know, he was like this when he first met Sonic. It's ironic that the braggart has no reaction to all of the praise for him. Unless I was right that his bragging was only a coping mechanism while he's so insecure about his personality, which makes sense since he grew up with no one complimenting him on it. So when he finally does meet a fanboy of his, it's weird enough that he keeps waiting for the catch. That's relatable. All Sonic did was say the word but, and Tails talks as if it was a totally unique thing of him to say. This is kind of like Colors. If this was a separate franchise, some people would be wondering if Tails was going to turn out to be only pretending to like him to get him on his side because he just wanted to take advantage of his powers. even a completely harmless invention. They could have still done that if they had him warm up to his personality afterwards. He could have been more subversive. After padding, it disappoints me by going to Eggman's point of view. Eggman rides a riding mower at 12 miles per hour. His confusingly named control pad finally reconnects to the internet. There's a lame line that it's time for him to get his mojo back. Trying too hard. After padding, he puts in a code for an invasive data sweeping algorithm. He's surprised to find out Agent Stone's the owner of a cafe he auto-dials. It's good that the cafe is called Mean Bean. Not only because it's a reference to the game Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine, but also because it makes sense in universe. It makes sense that someone who hates most people would call a cafe that. Stone doesn't have a surprised reaction to Eggman being back. He knew him well enough to know he'd come back eventually. I still thought he'd be happy. After padding, someone who refuses to leave the cafe gets attacked by Stone and people scream. It's using his character better as a villain. It's too bad he doesn't do that a lot more often, so ultimately he barely has an impression on me. He whispers a lame line in code to Eggman to tell him he's going to come back to him. He hangs up, and after padding, Eggman waits. The narration finally lampshades the indignity of him riding on a mower. And the writer thought enough to realize he'd still have the taste of stale mushrooms on his tongue if he rushed to Earth as fast as possible without getting a drink first. But the last mushroom he ate wasn't stale. Guess he ate some stale mushrooms off screen. Why wouldn't he eat the mushrooms that were growing all around him instead of stale mushrooms? I guess most of the mushrooms growing around him weren't edible. It's weird to call Eggman's robots his babies, and beautiful, as if he cares about them and doesn't just see them as tools. His red-eyed drones surround him, having escaped from the secret satellite housing pit by Stone's pre-planned activation protocols. After padding, the drones replace Eggman's somehow tattered clothes with his outfit from the previous film, and styled his mustache so it was somehow aerodynamic. I guess he got insecure enough to want a mustache change because Sonic beat him. Then several of the drones combined to make a floating throne for him to show off with. That seems new. It makes sense to make the modern Sonic movies give Eggman a bunch of drones as a focus. But they still should have looked like insects and had some color instead of having no personality to do both things. I picture them as having the same lifeless gray aesthetic as the robots from '06. So how is it okay when these movies do it? How is it okay that he looks even less like Eggman in those than he did in '06? It has to have bad gameplay for people to insult it. My point was that he's always had flying robots. Eggman guides his new transport towards the burning site Knuckles was at, and at the top of the cliff, he hears the disgruntled noises of the bruised Knuckles clawing his way up the rock face into the street. It was a waste of time to remind us he's a red alien. It insists that he's muscle-bound when he's not. It calls him a miscreant when that's only true because Sonic's a good guy, but Eggman doesn't think of him like that. So it'd be Sonic who's a miscreant to Eggman. After padding like boring dialogue, where at least Knuckles told Eggman they have no more use for each other, Eggman lies that he rules the Earth and knows everything about it. Knuckles says he doesn't understand anything he said because he used a lot of advanced words. Well, that's a shame. Eggman does exactly what he just complained about. Finally, he starts having some great lines, even if it is long-winded. He says if you remove E and T from my planet, it spells my plan. And he says my planet, my plan. It should still be pretty obvious that he's evil. Eventually he says it'll help him get back the emerald. Why didn't he just say that right away? But he doesn't explain why he would be helpful to him. After padding, where I'm somehow expected to believe echidnas only enter an alliance after an organ transplant, even though Mobius is a primitive planet in the films and the echidnas were primitive, Eggman says around here we simply grip each other's hands tightly. Why did he say tightly? After pointless dialogue, I get to read about Eggman screaming and saying Knuckles crushed his favorite hand. And with how unlikable Knuckles is, I'm glad he called him a bumpkin. Which conveniently didn't change his mind about deciding to get his help when he didn't say how he would help him. But the other words were a waste of time. There's padding where it pointlessly has a scene about Agent Stone meeting Knuckles, where the only thing good is Stone getting his hand crushed by Knuckles and falling on his knees. Eventually, Stone steps up to the chromium pipes of its high-end coffee maker. It didn't need to say they were chromium and that it was high-end. In front of the main steamer, a red electric sensor activates. The light of a retina scan blinks up and down Stone's eye, so that's competent technology. And after padding, a computer screen emerges from inside the bean grinder. There's padding, and it turns out Eggman made a book for him saying that he should make a secure safe house for him in the event of his capture or disappearance, or even account suspension on social media somehow. Why would that justify it? That's a forced joke, so after all of the complaining about Sonic Boom and Colors, this shouldn't get a pass. There's more padding where it turns out Eggman has a treadmill with a sound system here. He doesn't deserve to be able to get fit, and Eggman would never want to use that. After padding, Stone finally explains that the government dissolved all record of Eggman's identity. That sounds unrealistically extreme. People who did worse things didn't get that treatment. Well, it's a good thing it's not actually Earth. I've read on TV tropes that it's supposed to be a little more advanced than Earth. At least I get to read about Eggman being mad. After padding, Eggman's told they froze our assets and bank accounts. Why does he say our and not just your? Why would they have a joint account? They're not related. That would be gutsy. And they're not married. That would also be gutsy. After padding, Eggman quickly hacks his way through a few dozen billionaires' bank accounts, somehow doing so quickly. That's the only reason this looks hard to believe. I read about the deleted scene on TV tropes, where he stole the Kickstarter of someone in a full body cast to get the money. So that's needlessly mean-spirited. I like this a lot better. It's better than expecting me to believe that people would fund Eggman when all they know about him is that he damaged the Great Wall of China and caused collateral damage in America. I like the idea of a novelization making deleted scenes canon. I like even more the idea of them using a different version of deleted scenes, but it's better. I'm glad it was part of the book, because it explains how Eggman got his money. That's not padding, that's actually important. There's more padding, where the narration says that Tails noticed the people in this town leave their lights on all night. Yeah, right. After padding, Sonic leads him into Wade's garage of all places out of nowhere, which is of all places the place where he goes when he wants to be alone. There's more blatant padding after this. It continues portraying Wade as accident-prone despite being a deputy, in every single scene he's in, which is cartoonishly unimmersive. Earlier he lost the keys for his car. At least that is less tone-deaf than just having one positively portrayed cop like in the last movie. So it is good for trying to be entertaining. But it overestimates how good it is. Still, when I look at a character like Wade, I understand why he was in the spin-off show. It almost stretches believability how stupid he is, but in an Archie Andrews sort of way. At no point am I told what Wade looks like, so I'm just picturing yet another brown-haired guy. Surprisingly, Sonic introduces Wade to Tails, and shockingly, Wade doesn't have any reaction to meeting someone who looks like Tails. He doesn't ask why he's on Earth or why he has two tails. Instead, there's more padding. I guess the reason he wished he could have a girlfriend in front of him was he was hoping Sonic would get him one if he said that. There's a bunch more padding, including a part where somehow Tails knows he can hold a map up to a window to charge circuits in the paper and project a hologram of Longclaw to tell him stuff. Well, at least that's new, but I thought there wasn't any technology on our planet. Then there's no excuse for it being backwards in the last movie. Because why would the echidnas be backwards, not everyone else? If they're doing a whole war against the owls, wouldn't they have gone technology from other people? I guess everybody hates the echidnas, so they didn't give them any technology. But the echidnas could have stolen technology from other people. Wouldn't they have stolen technology from the owls if they were that advanced? The dingoes stole technology from the echidnas, and that really backfired on them. So wouldn't it have really backfired on the owls? Wouldn't the owls have been made extinct? Oh, so they made a map like this, but they didn't make any nukes. Okay. After padding, Longclaw's hologram says that the echidnas had combined the Chaos Emeralds with the Master Emerald long ago. Too bad she doesn't explain how in the world they did that intentionally without being guardians of the Emerald who spent their whole lives training to use its power. But I'm glad I had a new idea. The combination Emerald was able to defeat entire armies just from a person's thought. That's new. And it wouldn't make any sense if they didn't combine the Emeralds together to make that the case. Because if the Master Emerald alone was able to do that, then I'd question why Eggman didn't destroy Sonic as soon as he got the Emerald in Sonic 3. After pointless dialogue, Longclaw says that's why the Master Emerald was hidden by the owls, so it's retconning it. It wasn't hidden because of that stupid other reason. Good. After padding, she says she wants Sonic to protect the Master Emerald. Why? It was hidden so well nobody could find it. It doesn't need a guardian then. If anything, someone taking it out of its hiding place would make it more likely that it'd be taken. She apologizes for not being able to be there for Sonic. After padding, somehow Wave didn't understand any of what she said. After Tails wastes my time by telling Wave that she means the Master Emerald is the most powerful thing ever. Out of complete nowhere, he says that only Sonic can track it. That's new. I sure hope Shadow can track Chaos Energy in the next movie. Because why wouldn't he be able to at that point? After padding, Tails somehow knows to tap the map with a tool to send a current through it that turns it into a new map that shows them Siberia. Somehow, Tails knows that in Siberia is a compass that'll guide them to the Emerald. Good, another new idea. He had gotten excited when told he had a map in the first place. So I assume he already knew all about the map's capabilities. But how? Why would the owls tell anyone else about that? Why would they have that written down if they don't want anyone else but the owls to know about it? I assume the owls just stay with the owls, so non-owls wouldn't have heard about it. The echidnas just stay with the echidnas, and there's no mention that anyone but the owls were fighting the echidnas. Even though if Longclaw was loved enough to have a memorial in the comic, then you'd think that other people than just owls would have been fighting the echidnas to help them. If they were really the good guys. I just want Tails to go back to being a character instead of a non-stop exposition fairy. But barely any of his lines in this movie are about being a character. There's a bunch of padding where Tails repeats the exposition Longclaw said about the Emerald. Where it is interesting that Sonic assumes Knuckles would conquer the universe with the Master Emerald. And stupid because he clearly told him what he wanted to do with it. He brags and Tails smiles a lot because of it. Of course, someone who admires Sonic and is his best friend would admire one of the main things about him. Tails rephrases what he said earlier for no reason. They must think the audience is all stupid. Well, it doesn't appeal to the non-stupid people. Wade said he knew a Knuckles in middle school who could put his whole fist in his mouth. That's impossible, so he must only think that because it was lied to. The teeth would get in the way. Like, he would still wear dentures, even if he didn't have any teeth. He says if this is the same guy, we're screwed. I like that it was gutsy enough to say screwed. I never thought a Sonic story would do that. So now Sonic fans would have no excuse for getting offended at seeing a Sonic story use that word. After padding, where Sonic recaps some more for no reason, eventually Sonic says he's gotta go at this alone. When Tails says he could use his help though, Sonic nods. So he contradicted himself immediately. He's not against putting him in danger anymore. It's sweet that it gives Tails an electric feeling. After pointless narration, during which it proves me right that Sonic had been all around the world by this point, which I had decided against mentioning earlier. So why the hell hadn't he visited Seattle yet? Some people walk through a Siberian blizzard bundled up in oversized overcoats and hats that hide what they really look like, and it's Sonic and Tails who had warped there with a ring. I love that it's realistic enough to do that. But why didn't the writer tell me what color the coats and hats were?